Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. From the early days of TV medicine, beginning with Dr. Kildare, on to St. Elsewhere, then ER and Grey's Anatomy, the public continues to be fascinated by the fear and the mystery of breaking down, of being sick, and also of those magic hands, those with the superhuman knowledge and insight, the quick decisions, able to make them better. Bellevue Hospital in New York City is home to many of these miraculous hands. To talk about Bellevue and its world-famous emergency medical department is Dr. Louis Goldfrank, one of the founding fathers of emergency medicine, director of the emergency medicine at Bellevue Hospital. He's the medical director of the New York City Poison Control Center and holds other positions just too numerous to mention. Welcome, Dr. Goldfrank.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
You have more letters after your name than anybody I know. You have more prestigious academic and medical positions, more awards and honors. You're the author of the gold standard toxicological text, and you're a distinguished teacher. How do you have the time to do all of this?
We have lots of problems in the world, and we have lots of interested students, and a place like Bellevue in New York City attracts the most enthusiastic people. So there are lots of people to talk with. If you talk to smart people, they tell you interesting things. If you have a population such as Bellevue where there are an infinite number of problems and patients, so you learn every day.
When we met at Bellevue, you quoted the White Queen in Through the Looking Glass, and the quote was, "We are able to believe 6 impossible things before breakfast." Explain.
I studied quantum mechanics in college, and that's about uncertainty. Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. That's a lot to do with life in the emergency department. You have to be able to adjust to not knowing what will happen, but you have to believe that the things you understand will allow you to make a correct decision when something uncertain happens.
I mean, you've described it as a juggler's world, but it's much more frenetic than that. It's juggling and shooting gallery, and things pop up. And when you do your moulages, your mock disasters, I mean, you elaborately construct these scenarios.
We'd like people to feel more secure with the things they don't understand. We'd like people to change and learn as they see more problems and more critical situations. And in emergency medicine, it's never a single human being, but it's a population, either the population in front of us or the population out there in the world. And that we have to look at each human being and say, what's the lesion in the public health system that brought this human being to this emergency department today?
But see, you're coming from Bellevue. You're coming from the oldest public hospital in the United States, which has got a mission to serve all of those who come, as Frost said, the place where you go where they must take you in. So your ethic, both your personal ethic, as I understand it, having read this excellent emergency doctor, which we'll talk about later, but also the ethic of your profession forces you to be that introspective. I don't see this in the field, if you will.
Well, many people who do emergency medicine do that. We're often told that, you're not going to take care of a patient for his or her whole life. And I'd say I'd miss out on that, but I get to meet many people over their lives. On the other hand, what I do is take care of a population. I create a fabric for a city that allows it to function safely. And we attract many people like that. We might have, many of us came out of the mold of thinking about Rudolf Virchow, who said the doctor is the advocate, is the lawyer of the people, from the 1850s. And we grew up in the civil rights era, and we grew up in an era where you had to act for people who weren't getting service. So in America, there are millions of people, 45 million people not getting adequate health care.
And you are now working in an environment where those values, I would argue, are not paramount. What's your assessment?
I'm working at the Bellevue Hospital, where we care for any human being under any circumstance at any time. I work at an institution that can provide care for the most disenfranchised with the same level, same standard, same quality as for the guy who comes in with the most. And I think that allows us to attract large numbers of people at Bellevue and New York University to that environment, because it creates the highest ethical standard for the rendering of care.
And also provides skills that we were talking earlier. How do you teach people or create the conditions where they can react to this uncertainty? You've got somebody comes in and it's chaotic and there's inadequate communication on the basis of little pieces of evidence. This diagnosis comes in, and you've got all your ABCs, A, B, C, D, E, Fs, all your mnemonics. How does that happen?
We learn to be very observant with the facts and the information that we're presented with. We listen to what the paramedics said. We walk in the city and we feel the weather of the day. We know that if it's very hot or very cold, it's going to make a difference. We know what the papers say and tell us where there are crises for one particular community. We smell the person, we look at the clothes, we look at the environment, we think about the characteristics, small signs that may give us a clue as to what the patient's clinical problems or makeup might be. We try to limit the amount of uncertainty so that we can do the best possible for that human being, because we're often asked to make many decisions before we've ever found a name or a number for a person and made a contact. And it may be the difference between life and death. So we have certain things that we can do that have a very limited amount of risk, but a substantial amount of potential benefit for a patient.
The scenes in, for example, ER demonstrate a certain amount of this occupational turmoil and chaos. Just generally, those shows as they reflect the reality, and in fact, have you been involved in the creation of or the production of any of those shows?
We have some of our staff, and we've talked to people. I'm not much of a TV type, so that I look at
kudos.
I look at the situation in the emergency department and see a level of order. Other people who don't work in the emergency department might see a level of chaos. The style of an emergency physician is to bring that order out of chaos and to believe that there's a standard, that people aren't seen in the order in which they arrive, they're seen in the order of their severity of illness.
So you have a triage.
We do, and we have that's decentralized to try to make it at the bedside.
Now, what's the nature of the triage?
Well, the first level of triage is to decide if someone's alive or dead. The next level in our setting might be, is this an adult or is this a child? Is this someone who's got a grave psychosis or a problem that could be better treated without psychiatric care? Someone who's got a knife in his chest or a wound in her abdomen. We can make some big decisions, and then we move people rapidly to the bedside where a young doctor and a young nurse or a mature doctor and a mature nurse work hard to save that person.
And when you think of the emergency room, what you have at Bellevue is not a room, but you have dozens of rooms. It is a big facility. Could you just give us some sort of quantitative or physical description of what this is, all those various rooms?
Well, the idea is that people function better when they have a certain level of personal space. And so emergency rooms from the 70s were very, very small, because one didn't have the staff to put there and one didn't have a concept of what to do. As Medicaid and Medicare expanded, and where people could be saved with things that one never could have imagined in the past, many people came to emergency departments. And those of us who've worked in these environments said, well, it's got to be big. Ours is 75,000 square feet. It allows every person, whether he or she is agitated or he or she is very calm, the individual is small or big, they have enough space so people can work around.
And they have separate room. I mean, it was spacious. I was really shocked because I go to suburban hospitals frequently in the emergency room, and take me to Bellevue every time.
The idea is to bring somebody into a space and have enough room around that person to do whatever is necessary to save that person's life. It might be talking, it might be putting tubes in, it might be doing defibrillation, it could be anything, but there has to be enough space so good people can work and the patient doesn't feel threatened. The patient feels as though he or she is, something good's going to happen.
And really the department is a hospital within the hospital, because you have hospital style units within the emergency rooms.
We have a space for children. We have a space for adults. We have a space for psychiatric patients who are gravely ill. We have a space that's for the very dangerous person who's a prisoner. We have a space for the most severely injured people. And we have an intensive care unit in the emergency department that allows us to take care of anybody who's injured in the streets of New York. We don't ever shut our doors. We're always open. We don't set limits based upon limits that are artificial, because the city isn't artificial, it's real. Many people can be injured at one time.
Okay, I want to move to expand on what you're saying. Reading this book and speaking with you, you've got a very expansive view of Hippocrates' do no harm. Could you explain your personal and professional philosophy here?
I think that our job is simple. It's to try to make people feel better, and therefore we look at human beings and say, is this really an emergency? We say, well, it's an emergency in the eye of the patient. It doesn't have to be in an analytic point of view from my perspective as an expert on emergency. Anything a person feels is an emergency. And our objective is to try to help that person. And by so doing, that person can function better in the world. It may be a mother who's concerned about how to nurse. It may be about coming with abdominal pain that one can't understand and going through simple things to discuss it, or it may be with someone who's got a life-threatening toxic exposure. So our job is to be there when people need us.
Let me segue. I want to bounce over. When you said toxic, you're also head of the Poison Control Center, and one of the, as I mentioned, leading toxicologists, the Goldfrank's Toxicologic Emergencies, 2,000 pages.
We have a strong team of people who work at the New York City Poison Center.
How's that? What's the relationship between the center, Bellevue?
The Poison Center is run by the City of New York.
So it's a New York City government agency.
New York City government agency, and I've worked in an unpaid relationship for 30 years there. Standards set up by an effort by the United States government to say that every single person should be covered by a poison center. So you've got to know that there's a toll-free number for all people in multiple languages. We've got to know, we initially had it as 212 poisons, so anybody could call that number. We now have a national number, but we have, my role as the medical director links us between Bellevue and NYU and the Poison Center. We have a center director, Robert Hoffman. We have core people. We educate more toxicologists there than any place else in America, because we see more problems from people across the world than anybody else does.
The number, I mean, and this book it was written in 1987, and then you have an afterward written last year. The number and types of poisons are remarkable, and in fact, I was watching the news very infrequently that I do it last evening, and there was a party, and a boyfriend gave a girlfriend, through a kiss, a piece of peanut. And you had mentioned the allergic reaction in the book of somebody dying from it, in this case on a dare. But this person died, and I watched it, and I said, oh, I can't read Goldfrank anymore.
The idea is to think about things that no one's ever thought about before, this idea of thinking about the unthinkable or the unbelievable. And it allows you to stay excited about medicine and life throughout life. That's how we attract great people. That New York City Poison Center had a great writer, Bertrand Ruchet, who used to write the Annals of Medicine in the New Yorker and wrote The Medical Detective. He sat there and he listened to cases as they came in, and he went to do his work across the city.
One of the joys of your job, you tell me, is that every day you learn a ton. You're learning something. You never get stale.
That's the idea of enjoying one's life as a doctor, and probably in any life, to be able to learn a great deal. Then the trick is to let other people share in that learning.
Okay, that's what I want to, now I want to segue back to that, and that is not only your role as the director of the emergency department of Bellevue and your position with poison control, but a faculty member, if not the chair of the emergency medical department at NYU, and you were instrumental in creating the department and emergency medicine as a field. Could you give us a little historical retrospective, please?
Well, when I first started to look at emergency medicine, I thought the patients are there, the problems are there, but no one's going to solve them. So when I began my work as a faculty member, I started in the midst of the South Bronx at the old Morrisania City Hospital.
I spent time there in the emergency room,
Yes,
in fact.
and I hope we did a good job for you.
I was knocked unconscious playing football, but I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah. So I cataloged. I wrote down all the questions people asked. I wrote down what the young people asked. I wrote down what the nurses taught me. I looked at the problems, and I said, we've got to solve this because people are coming. In those days, there were probably 30 or 40 million. 30 million people came to emergency departments. Today, there are 115 million coming to emergency departments.
You have over 100,000 a year.
That's correct. But everywhere in America, people are coming expecting probably answers to simple and complex problems. People need gratification. They need immediate answers.
And they're not getting it in the rest of the healthcare system, quote unquote.
I think just as we doctors know that when we've got a problem, we worry about it and we do things rapidly to solve it. People have become sensitized to the idea they need solutions too. And it's our responsibility to help people so they can function better at their work or their home or their relationships, so they don't have too much anxiety over things that they shouldn't, but so that they're concerned about things that they should. And we have to find solutions for them.
What I found remarkable in the book is the level of tolerance for deviant behavior, from the most simple dirtiness and whatever to more profound psychotic. And it struck me that ethic is a tough one. That's a tough culture to create, or an easy culture to create, but really very insulated from the rest of the society. I mean, you're dealing with, 8th Street Eddie and the homeless people. You've got the regulars.
Some of those, I see the picture of Grand Central behind you. I tell you that when I go to Grand Central, I'm treated royally. There's often a guy who we've cared, who opens the door for me.
This is the perks.
He asks for a little money, but I say hello to him. I said, I'll give you good care tomorrow when you come back. But I see them throughout. They've shown me the catacombs at Grand Central, a lot of things that you understand how people live in their own world. Our job is, is it, what's worse, eating too much brie and roast beef and getting heart disease, or using cocaine? Sure, one's legal, one's illegal. Every time someone eats too much brie and marbled beef, it costs them a great deal in their coronary bypass, and they cost society a great deal. I mean, I think we all have you drive too fast, you drink too much, you do things of harm to society, you use heroin, you do these things. I mean, we could do better if every individual took care of himself or herself better. We'd save society a lot of money.
Well, part of the problem is people don't know how to do it. I mean, I have to tell you, I'm a fairly, reasonably informed guy. I'm reading this and I'm really horrified. When they explain the drinks, drinking the martini, I'm not a drinker. I drink wine. I'm Italian. It was. Let's talk about instruction now. I mean, and these are instructional modes. You're in the midst of this crisis. There's all kinds of stuff going on. People are bleeding and there's interruption. And in a sense, you're conducting a class at the same time as doing first-rate medical care. I mean, how do you do that? How does that happen, first of all?
Well, the class is for the nurses and the doctors and the students to see how you can enjoy an interchange with another human being and try to bring that person into the process so the person learns and teaches students, and it's a sharing relationship, as well as trying to transform the future for these individuals, all of them, that they see how each person is so important, so relevant in society, and that we can't make it as a society unless everyone makes it. You can't allow the guy who's drunk to go around being violent or to drive a car and hit somebody else, otherwise any of us can suffer. You can't allow the individual who's coughing not to feel at ease about coming to the hospital because he or she might have TB. You've got to make a safe place for that person to come and get care. You've got to make every human being feel safe in participating in the healthcare system.
And you deal with, given that you are the place of last resort, you deal with the homeless, the residuum of society, if you will.
We deal with the principles of humanism, that how to take care of a human being. It doesn't matter. We all look the same when we get washed up and shaved. It doesn't make much difference. So that if you can't if you can find a reason not to take care of an individual, you probably can discriminate against individuals throughout society, and it doesn't work.
Well taken.
It doesn't work, and we fall apart as a humanistic group.
Okay, I mean, and you're talking normatively. You know, this is a moral point of view. Certainly, we recognize that that's not universally adopted in the real world, but certainly a goal. And in your space, at least from what the little that I saw, and certainly in the book, it's there and it can be created and sustained.
That's right. I think you can. The City of New York stands for certain principles of access. The city's Health and Hospital Corporation is the highest quality effort to try to render for all human beings. And so it makes it easy for people such as myself and the students and residents and nurses we attract, pharmacists, to all pitch in and feel, here I can be a doctor or a nurse or a pharmacist or a student believing in human beings. That's what our profession's supposed to be about. And in an environment such as ours, it's very easy to practice it faithfully.
One of the interesting things about your job is that you often don't see the end of the story. I mean, sometimes you see the end of the story because unfortunately it's death. But many of the people, do you ever wonder, or is it just you?
Sure, I wonder. I'd like to know. I know that.
I mean, are there 2 or 3 people in your 20 years, 25 years, that you would have said, I'd like to know what happened to that person?
Oh, I find out.
Or there are dozens of them.
We find out every. Many people come back and tell us. Many people we admit to the patient to the hospital, and the doctors there tell us that we did something correct or we did something incorrect, or we should have done this or should have done that. We learn from everyone. And I know that 100,000 people will come to this emergency department. 100,000 went to Morrisania, 100,000 people went to Montefiore, 100,000 people come to the Bellevue Hospital, 35,000 come to the Tisch Emergency Department, the University Emergency Department. And I know, I can tell you the distribution, the number of people are going to come with asthma, the number of people are going to come with trauma, the number of people who are gunshot every year. I don't know who's going to come at any particular point. I don't know why it's occurred, but I can put the big picture together, and I can tell you what's wrong with society and what has to be changed, and I can talk about generalities of people, and so that we can transform the environment, and we can try to make sure that there are fewer people who have this problem when we look to something else.
Working from the problem and branching out that way.
When I first started, we saw one child who had lead poisoning so bad that the child had convulsions and couldn't think every single week in the South Bronx. Today we don't see that any longer, because we took the lead out of gasoline, because we took the lead out of the paint, because we cleaned the houses, because we put people under surveillance. I used to spend my hours every day in the South Bronx cleaning glass out of people's face from big motor vehicle crashes. We have tempered glass, and that glass isn't the same any longer. We can make structural engineering changes about our environment to make it safer for people.
How do you do the work on the ground and at the same time, or you and others like you work day to day, and at the same time produce the knowledge that allows it to become more manifest to larger audiences?
We have to work with everyone in society. We work with the people who do public health. We work with the people who do environmental medicine and internal medicine and pediatrics and surgery. We all have to cooperate. We have to cooperate on a continuous basis to find the common ground to make the changes necessary in society. We have to get the activists. A good example would be a decade ago, every single day or every other day in our emergency department, someone came in with a big injury to the face, lacerated eyelids, fractured teeth, broken nose. And the first one we thought a little bit about, and it was every day was someone who came in the back seat of a New York City taxi cab without putting a seatbelt on. And when we studied that, well, there weren't seatbelts in those days, so they were locked behind, so they couldn't get it. And in other words, so we had to change the laws.
Right.
We had to fight these things. So you don't have to be too smart, but you have to be observant.
Okay. And there's a lot to observe in terms of the immediate and more distant causes.
It's a kaleidoscopic view of everything that goes on in our city.
Thank you. You said it better than I did. I want to move to a specific issue, and that was the subject of a CBS report, Dying on Life Support. Is it fair? And you described unnecessary life prolongation as medicine's greatest problem currently. Could you explain?
I think that there's an immense amount of elder abuse or abuse of those people near the end of lives. Everyone needs to have some level of friendship at the end of life. You have to have someone who acts as your advocate to help assure that things that are done for you at the end of life are useful to you. People have to defend themselves from having too much done when there's nothing really beneficial to be done for a human being. We invest far too much money, far too much energy and exert too much pain on the elderly with unnecessary procedures at this stage of their lives. And we need to think very carefully about that. If you don't have someone who's your proxy, you don't have someone to stand up and say what should be done for you at the end of life, things will be done only because they're part of our process of medicine, and it's a tragedy.
And you're governed by, well, you're governed obviously by the 1990 Supreme Court decision, but also the legislation pursuant to it in New York and other places.
It really doesn't, it's not, I don't necessarily want to decide for
No,
someone.
no.
I don't necessarily want to decide what someone needs
Right.
done. But in the absence of an individual making a decision, I'm forced to do things
Right.
that probably aren't beneficial.
Right.
And I think we need to recognize that people have the capacity to avoid these end-of-life intubations of a tube in the trachea, a breathing
How do we
device.
do the public education?
Like almost everything we've talked about, people have to have better education about what their rights are, what their responsibilities are, and what is public health. What is it that you can
But
do?
how does it get out there?
Well, you could have in all the newspapers and televisions and radio stations of the city of New York, you could say, this month we're going to talk about high blood pressure. And next month we're going to talk about influenza. We're going to have an educational section. The next month we're going to talk about the importance of dental care. We're going to talk about...
So you're offering your services for me to do this periodically?
Absolutely, anytime you wish. I think you have to get it does little good to have you and me understand this material.
Right.
It's essential for
Well,
the
no, I
other,
appreciate understanding it, but go ahead.
the other 8 million people in the city have to have a shared understanding of the basic issues of what a bacterium is, what a virus is, what radiation is.
What alcohol does, what
That's right.
tobacco does,
Everything.
with these over-the-counter drugs. I mean, it's a little scary here.
The idea is not to scare, but to educate and
I
to
understand.
ask people to participate in their health and to take control. And when people take control as a society, they transform the way medicine's practiced and they improve the world in which they live.
That's it. A pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you.